In October 1819, the board organized the first group of missionaries to the Hawaiian Islands. On October 23rd, they sailed from Boston in the Thaddeus on a painful and exhausting 160-day voyage around Cape Horn. By mid-century, 11 other groups followed. The 17 members of the first group were led by two ministers, the Reverend Hiram Bingham and the Reverend Asa Thurston. Samuel Whitney and Samuel Ruggles were teachers. Dr. Thomas Holman was a physician. Daniel Chamberlain was a farmer. Elisha Loomis was a printer. And their wives were expected to serve as teachers. 3 young Hawaiians came with them: William Kanui, John Honoli'i, and Thomas Hopu. Also among the passengers were the first 5 Chamberlain children and George Kaumuali'i, a son of the High Chief of Kauai. At the age of 6, Kaumuali'i had been sent to Boston to be educated. The missionaries, who differed in talents and temperaments, had been given a difficult assignment. They were to farm and build houses, schools, and churches. They were to learn the language of the people and teach them to read the Bible. Above all, they were to lead the Hawaiians away from their old religion. On March 30th, 1820, the Thaddeus anchored at Kauai on the Big Island. Messengers went ashore to find out what had been happening. They returned with news that Kamehameha was dead and that Liholiho had abolished the kapu. The missionaries saw this as proof that God had blessed their plans. Learning that the king and chiefs were at Kailua, the captain sailed there. Bingham and Thurston were greeted by Kalanimoku. After they called on Kuakini, the governor, and John Young, the king's advisor, they were allowed to meet with Liholiho. They gave him gifts and asked for permission to stay in the islands. For several days, the king withheld his decision while he talked with the chiefs. On April 6th, Bingham invited him and his queens to dine on the Thaddeus. The next day, some of the women in the missionary party went ashore with the men. The Hawaiians had often seen haole men with their children by Hawaiian women, but the sight of haole women was new to them. Samuel Kamakau describes the excitement as the party walked along the beach. The people came in crowds, men, women, and children, and exclaimed over the pretty faces of the white women, their deepest eyes, their bonnets that jutted forward, their long necks, which won for them the name long neck, or a'ioi. Crowds gathered, and one and another exclaimed, "How white the women are! What long necks! But pleasing to look at! What pinched-in bodies! What tight clothing above and wide below!" On the next day, Bingham again pressed the king for a decision. John Young and the queen supported the missionaries' request to stay. Opposing them were some of the chiefs and a Frenchman named Jean B. Reeves, who had gained a strong influence over Liholiho. Reeves may have feared that the missionaries would compete with him for the king's favor. He argued that the missionaries were dangerous. He said that they would try to seize the government and that their religion was not true Christianity. Later, in Honolulu, other foreigners, traders, and whalers told the chiefs that when the missionaries dug cellars under their houses, they intended to store gunpowder there to prepare for an armed uprising. Finally, the king made his decision. The doctor and one of the ministers were to stay in Kailua Kona, but the rest could go to Honolulu. They could stay for only 1 year. Encouraged by this decision, the missionaries made their plans. On April 12th, the trunks, boxes, and other baggage of the Holmans, the Thurstons, William Kanui, and Thomas Hopu, who were to stay in Kailua, were brought ashore. An entry in Lucy Thurston's journal describes their first evening in their new home. At evening twilight, we sundered ourselves from close family ties, from the dear old brig, and from civilization. We went ashore and entered, as our home, an abode of the most uncouth and humble character. It was a thatched hut with one room, having 2 windows made simply by cutting away the thatch, leaving the bare poles. On the ground for the feet was a first layer of grass, then of mats. Here we found our effects from the Thaddeus, but no arrangement of them could be made till the house was thoroughly cleaned. About a week later, the rest of the party landed at Honolulu. Here they were welcomed by Governor Boki and by a number of Haole residents, who gave them temporary shelter until houses could be built for them. Toward the end of April, the Thaddeus sailed for Kauai, bearing Whitney and Ruggles. They, with their wives, were to establish the first mission station on that island. Also on board was George Kaumuali'i, eagerly looking forward to a reunion with his royal father. In August, Kalani Moku asked that a teacher be sent to the island of Hawaii. Elisha Loomis, whose wife the month before had given birth to the first Haole child born in the islands, was chosen to go. On his way, he stopped at Maui to visit with the Holmans, who had moved to Lahaina without waiting for permission from the mission. Soon after that, the Holmans were recalled to Oahu. Since the Holmans' relations with Hiram Bingham had become strained, they moved on to Kauai. Now, only Bingham and Chamberlain were left in Honolulu. When their first year ended, they persuaded the king, who had moved to Honolulu by this time, to let them stay. The work of building houses, conducting religious services, and establishing schools went on at a rapid pace. In August of 1821, they dedicated the first Christian church located where Kaiha'o Church now stands.